Okay, so in this particular session, what we wanted to do was talk about the digital divide. We've just spoken about all the billions of people that need somehow to look at what they will get in terms of products, services, and so on. And what I wanted to do, just quickly introduce each of the panel members, and then each will come up with a 5-minute intro of what they think is relevant and talk around it, and then we'll go to question and answers after that. So if I may start with Alex Lazaro, who is the part of the Omidyar Foundation. Alex, welcome. Chris Burns was on our last panel as well, represents USAID as the head of digital development. Colin McElwee, who represents World Reader, right here in sunny Barcelona. I'm jealous. Anil from OMC, and then Patrick Kabegama from Rwanda, representing the private sector ICT space there. So if I can perhaps ask Patrick, if you can start at your end with just a 5-minute brief view on what you think is going to address that digital divide.
I think one of the quick answer will be, we need to imagine. Imagine 20 years from now, a person in a village, a woman, she wakes up, you know, she's a bit sick, she's not feeling very well, but she has a smartphone. And by that time, the advances both in the medical field enable her with her smartphone, you know, to get some data to connect with a doctor. So, and she can tell, here's my symptom. So the doctor reply, I think you have this and this. So that's already an enabler. Now, today in the marketplace, most of what the farmer produce, they're unconnected to the end user. You know, with ICT, they will be able to be connected. If, for example, a farmer wants to take insurance on the crop, it's today is almost impossible. If the farmer wants to connect with the person who's actually going to consume the product, it is not possible as well. So I think the mobile part really open them up to the world, and we cannot fully understand the type of application and innovation that will come on the market and gonna address their need. But one thing will be key, it will affect both their earning power and will make their life better. For example, from an education perspective, today we have an education system that we're trying to replicate that most African country and developing country cannot afford. Now, when we are connected, then the education system can actually come to the people. Many poor people do not send their kid to school, not because they don't want, they just do not have the means. Now, once they're connected, education can come to them. Today, you all here have the ability, once you don't know anything, you just go and Google and figure out. You go on YouTube, you figure out things that 10, 15 years ago was impossible. And now what is happening, if we don't bridge that divide, if we don't bring those people to the connected age, we're going to do what happened 100 years ago, where the Industrial Revolution and all those nice innovation passed a couple billion people. So it's a matter, actually, I think, of survival, of moral, and all our value that those people are brought to this age so that the 21st century become also theirs. But what's going to happen after a generation of people who are connected? They will be able actually to start producing. Today, they have no access to knowledge, very little access to healthcare, and all the benefit of modern society. And I think the mobile space will enable them to come and actually also be producer. But it will also create an amazing business opportunity. in the developing world, because those people need services, and with the increase in their per capita and their earning power, they will be more and more able to buy the services that today they are not able. And in the last panel, they were talking about the fact that 55% is in English, all those things, but the market also need to be realistic. They cannot be, there is no market right now, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa large enough for content to be created. So connecting them will open up that market. And I have to tell you, as I think the person from Mozilla on the previous market said, it's a community of ID. They have ID. They can learn. Now, they will be able also to produce. And that's why I think for government, it should be the #1 priority to do whatever is required with the telecom, with the NGO, with the development partner to ensure that every person has the ability to be connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Anil, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Zouhair. The single largest problem facing the mobile industry in developing markets, I think across the board, is the fact that reliable power is very, very scarce. And a lot of the ideas, and actually pretty much all the ideas and things we're talking about here today, are not possible unless you have a source of reliable power, which brings me to OMC. OMC is a power company, a slightly different kind of a power company to the ones perhaps that you're used to. So our business is twofold. One, we power the telecom industry in the markets that we operate in. Typically, our customers are tower companies or telcos. And that accounts for roughly half the energy that we produce goes to the telecom industry. The other half of the energy that we produce goes to community. So we set up renewable energy-based power plants, small plants, in areas which don't have the traditional electricity infrastructure. We call this micropower. You know, if we roll back to the early days of the mobile industry, 1991, 92, you know, when GSM first started, and you know, think of the revolution which this industry has experienced. Exactly the same is what's happening in the energy industry. The power industry is an old, static, you know, not a dynamic industry, and it's been unchanged for decades. The structures remained essentially the same. What we're seeing now is a real revolution, which is driven by technology. So the affordability of low-cost solar panels, technologies like wind and wave power, you know, new biogas technologies and so on, which are driving down the cost of generating power, enable companies like OMC, you know, to come up and offer a real alternative to the traditional grid. So what we do is build these little micropower plants, which typically are between 50 and 100 kilowatts. This would serve a community of, say, 3,000 to 5,000 households, about 15 to 20,000 people. So we put up one power plant every day. So we bring, you know, between 15 and 20,000 people into mainstream every single day. By the end of this year, we will have some 500 of these plants in operation in India. And in 3 years' time, we will have 5,000 such plants serving between 10 and somewhere between 10 and 20 million people. The bulk of the energy we produce will be going to powering, you know, all the operators and the good stuff that we're going to be talking about here today.
Thank you. Colin, your perspective on how we'll do that digital divide?
Sure. Well, first, thank you to the GSMA for the invitation. I have to say I've been coming to this conference for about 5 or 6 years, and the first time I came, actually, I snagged a ticket from the cleaning and maintenance people, so cleaning and maintenance, yeah. And there was a moment when I asked a guy from a very, very large Chinese company for a good price for 100,000 e-readers, and he looked at my badge and just couldn't work out where the cleaning guy wanted to know So I've moved on a little bit since then. Bridging the digital divide. Well, I founded World Reader 5 years ago. I'm from a business background, and my co-founder is as well. And we came with really just a very simple ethos to this, is that looking at what exists already, existing technology, existing tools, can make an enormous impact on bridging the digital divide. And by that I mean, in our sense, it was that we looked at books and at knowledge, and we said, well, behind every book is a digital file. There's mobile connectivity there, 2G mobile connectivity that gets to in excess of 70% of people on sub-Saharan African continents. And then there are devices there as well. I mean, I always have to bring one of these guys along because everybody forgets what they look like. That's an old Nokia 2G Java-enabled phone. And really, our ethos is that, yes, there is a digital revolution happening at 3G, at 4G, and beyond. And the capacities of those technologies, and actually the user experience is going to create, as Patrick said, we can't even forecast exactly how that's going to manifest itself in terms of new ideas and new behaviors. However, there are technologies that exist right now. It's not about tomorrow. This is one of my pleas to the conference, to the Congress for the last 5 years, is that the revolution is happening now with tools that are existing. So let me give you an idea of that. We're reaching about 400,000 people at the moment. We work in schools and classrooms with e-readers, but outside we work with these devices. So 95% of our impact is on these devices. UNESCO took the data that we get back from this and published a report last year on World Book Day that showed, I'll give you one piece of data, is that these devices are being read by women and men, by girls and boys, but girls are spending consistently not twice as much time, but 5 to 6 as much time reading. And we know what they're reading. We also know what to give them, and they can actually tell us what they want as well. And so our ethos on this is that we're not going to try and say, this is innovative and that's not. But information and knowledge in the hands of people in the places that we're trying to reach, that's where the innovation will come. It's not about shiny new things and new technologies only. It's about sometimes connecting the dots amongst existing technology, existing ideas, but in the hands of the people that you're trying to get. And I think that's where the real bridge to the digital divide is going to come from.
Thank you, Colin. Chris, I know you have a bigger perspective on all of this, and you were at the last panel as well. Your views on that?
Yeah, thanks, Zouhair. I guess I'm charged with not saying the same thing as I said last time for those of you who were here. So the panel prior to this, we touched a lot on digital literacy and local content and the roles they play in bridging the divide. But I think it's worth rising up a little bit to more macro level. And for USAID, which is, for those of you who don't know, the largest bilateral development agency around, where our work comes into play is really predicated on this emerging digital economy that is alive and that is thriving and that is driven by new modes of communication and sharing ideas and new business models and more enhanced data-driven decision making that really, in our belief, has a fundamental opportunity to expand and accelerate our development impact and the development agenda of the countries where we work around the world. And obviously that has a lot to do with driving greater economic growth, but also enhancing people's livelihoods, particularly those who are the most underserved and frankly those who we spend most of our time working for. The reality of this digital economy is it's not set up for those who are most underserved to really play a part in. And the playing field just isn't level at all. And we see that a lot with a lot of technology-driven solutions, sometimes they can actually exacerbate socioeconomic inequalities, even if they don't mean to. Certainly, the persistent mobile phone gender gap that continues in the developing world is one case in point. 200 million fewer women than men really using and owning phones to enhance their lives. And certainly, I think the incentives for mobile operators, too, are not really set up for them, given the day and age of declining ARPUs, to really pivot and focus into more rural and remote communities and really extend the grid and the capacity for those who are less able to really envelop what mobile tools have to offer. So that's the status of the digital economy. And for us, we want to make it more inclusive. And where we think there's real value is looking at the underlying platforms or the building blocks that allow an inclusive digital economy to thrive. And for us, they're in three basic buckets. They in part have to deal with digital financial services and everything that they provide, with mobile money just as an entree into it. It's everything that's built on top of mobile money products and credit and insurance and savings, et cetera. But then also in digital inclusion, where we put connectivity and issues of affordability and digital literacy and local content, and then also real-time data and being able to use that to drive decision-making, largely for the development community, but I think basically anyone. It's that platform that if we allow that to be put in place, then all the products and services and all the vast providers in the room and everything that development organizations are doing really then can come in and build on top of that. What we're seeing right now is there's this huge leap, at least in the development community, to put a new app out there and to put a new service out there aligned for underserved populations. But then they're finding out too far down the road that, only half of a community actually has phones, or less than half can't even really work their phones, and they're only using it for voice. So we're actually, by not concentrating on that fundamental building block that needs to be put in place, we're putting our implementing partners and others at a disservice by presuming that they should run forward in designing these applications in the absence of this. And that's really, I think, where we come into play. And I think it is important, if you believe that the statistic that in 2015, 90% of all jobs will require ICT skills. Now, that's a very traditional, perhaps even Western definition of a job. They're looking at the business professional out there in the world. But let's just say that a large majority of jobs in the world will require ICT skills. How you're defining that skill and what the baseline is, I think, is a fundamental starting point, and it requires a little unpacking. Obviously, we're talking about more than just being able to handle a basic mobile handset and interact with it for voice or for even getting online. When the professional world is talking about ICT skills, they're talking about a much more robust and complex set of skills that a lot of the people we work with don't quite have. So that baseline actually, I think, is very important as a starting point. And it shows the gap in the existing digital economy and the actual inclusive digital economy that we want to get to. And I think, a lot of our partnerships, which I'm happy to talk about a little bit later in this panel, are paving the way to bridge that gap.
Thank you, Chris. Alex?
Thank you.
Your view on this? I know you come from a sort of an organization which also has a very entrepreneurial arm to it as well, so perhaps a little bit around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and excited to be here. I work with the Omidyar network. We're a philanthropic investment firm founded by Pierre and Pam Omidyar, and we're really a product of Silicon Valley. We do very early stage VC investments in startups that are at the frontier of innovation in emerging markets, but we use philanthropic dollars as well to help build the ecosystem around it. So just a very brief example, we've invested in a bunch of mobile money deployment startups across the world, but we also partner with the GSMA's Mobile Money for the Unbanked to help build that side of the ecosystem. We've invested in about $800 million, roughly split evenly between for-profit and non-profit, in about 200 organizations. And I work on our financial inclusion initiative. So that'll be the lens that I'll take today. And over the last few years, at least when we started a lot of our work in mobile money, we really thought that the opportunity for mobile and internet was around solving the access problem, was how do we provide access to financial inclusion and mobile money to the 2.5 billion people that are unbanked and underbanked. And I think tomorrow we'll have a really great discussion with the State of the Industry report around mobile money about how a lot of traction has been made so far. There's now well over 200 mobile money deployments, over 100 million accounts and registered users. And so we haven't solved the access problem, but we're making really great strides towards getting there. However, I think there's still a lot of opportunities / barriers that I think mobile and mobile money and these platforms can help solve. And I think some of my fellow panelists have started talking about some of these as well. And specifically, 3 things that get me very excited, and I'm seeing some really interesting innovations coming out, is around engagement, around richness and richness of data, and third, using the platforms to have empowerment in adjacent industries. And I'll give just a couple examples of some startups and some innovations that I'm seeing in my day-to-day life. On the first, on engagement, while we have tons of registered users across the world for mobile money, but for many other of these services, active rates remain very low. So in mobile money, it's in the 30% range. And even among people that are active, most are only interacting with one type of product and maybe one time a month. And so there's a huge opportunity to build a much deeper relationship with the customer and an opportunity to drive active rates, to have people use it much longer. We invest in a company called Juntos Finanzas, which works with operators and mobile money deployments and financial services institutions to help build that engagement, help build that relationship. So they're an SMS-based platform that has conversations with customers. And so they start off with very simple, how do I do it type answers. Where can I find an agent that's close to me? How do I reset my PIN, et cetera. But over time, getting into much more personal conversations over a mobile medium. And so what are my financial goals? What am I saving for? What's my budget looking like? And what they see is that those kind of interactions, that type of relationship, has a material impact on active rates. So in some work that they did with Bancolombia in Colombia, they saw a 33% increase in their active rates and a 50% increase in savings balances. And so really see that we have a huge potential for much stronger engagement around these services that I think will really help bridge the digital divide. And I think these are lessons that we can apply across the spectrum and certainly in financial inclusion. I think second, just around the question of richness, we have a lot of data points. So a lot of people spoke about, and I think Chris, you mentioned this well. A lot of the data that's around there, that's around mobile, that's around some of the data streams that we get. One of the big barriers that we have is we don't know that much information about many of our customers to be able to provide them with relevant products and services. And can we use and leverage some of that information to be able to make better decisions and offer them more customized products and services? A company called Signify uses as little as 2 weeks of prepaid phone data to figure out a credit score, to figure out a marketing response score, to be able to provide a variety of digital products. In this case, concentrated around financial services, so like credit cards and insurance, but as well as postpaid to prepaid conversions and things like that. So really see a big potential of using that. So far, they've done their algorithm over 100 million users. And you could really see how this type of new big data algorithms could be used to provide more products and services and in a more customized way. And lastly, and I think this really touches on what my fellow panelist was touching about on OMC Power, is how a lot of these intersect with each other and create a virtuous cycle. One of the big challenges with power, we invest in a company called Off-Grid Electric, and they provide home solar systems to families in off-grid Tanzania. And the systems cost about $200. And the average one of their customers can't afford a $200 CapEx investment into a home solar system. What they can afford is 50 cents a day, which is what they pay today for kerosene, for light. And so what they figured out is a way to match what people are already spending on current customer behavior and have them instead invest in a home solar system that provides more light, cleaner, et cetera. And the only reason they're able to do it is because they accept all of their payments on mobile money, which allows the receipt of very small amounts of money very efficiently. And because of mobile and digital and technology, because they're able to remotely control it, the systems don't get turned on and people don't pay. And so not only does this create a virtuous cycle to more use of the phones and internet, but it also is created and helped and enabled by the enabling environment. And so looking forward to engaging conversation around some of these themes as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So I just wanted to come back to Patrick, perhaps yourself, when you described such a wonderful vision of 15 to 20 years from now when everybody will be using certain services and products. Clearly there's a need for the content to be developed for that, for the services to be developed for that. How do you think that area should be stimulated? Who needs to get into that? Who are the stakeholders that you see are vital to that area to progress with?
To answer that, I'm going to give a couple examples. I remember back then, 30 years ago, about 20 years ago, when the first mobile telecom started in Africa. I mean, we're still trying to figure out how to deploy wired, and a lot of money were wasted there until some entrepreneur took some Motorola technology, say, you know what? I can do it a lot cheaper in Africa. So here started the boom, and then throughout the developing world, we moved from trying to wire and physically connect each one. The same with mobile money. Development agency, all PhD, I mean, they came together how to bank the poor. I mean, they put money after money until, M-Pesa showed up, and it came wildly. So I think we need to let the market and the entrepreneur. But the problem today, while will somebody invest and start developing content where there's no customer? If, for example, we say, okay, let's use Rwanda as an example. I mean, if you say broadband, meaning like 1 Mbps, it's less than 8%. When you go across other country. So my take is like, let's connect people. People start using, you could not have predicted in the US TurboTax before people were connected. So for example, you bought a laptop and a computer just to do your taxes. So those killer applications, those disruptive will come as long as people are connected. Today they're not connected, so it's very difficult. It's, I think, artificially trying to spur an industry where I don't think the market is there. Maybe in other places. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, your view?
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with you, Patrick. I think there's huge value in the connectivity, and I think some of the demand will follow. At what point in time, who knows? But I think what we've also seen is the adage of, we build it, they will come, doesn't always ring true, particularly when you're involving communities that haven't really had any interaction online or on device or with technology ever before. And, the issue of content, one that we touched on a little bit earlier, has been of huge interest to us because for a little over a year now, we've had a lot of people coming to us, mobile operators, NGOs, public and private sector actors, saying, we know that this content thing is something that we've got to figure out in order for businesses to thrive, in order to get more people online, in order to enhance their lives. But it's really intimidating, and we actually don't really know where to fit in. So Zouhair, I think to answer your question that you asked Patrick of how to really address the development of content, what we've been doing a series of conversations, round tables, publications, and just sorting out on the ground is trying to identify, the fact of the matter is there is a content value chain. It starts with content development, whether it's sourcing or creating. It goes through aggregation, localization, translation, and it gets into the distribution side. What's really critical here, and I think it's really critical about bridging the digital divide in general, is we often emphasize the need for partnerships, whether they're public-private, private-private, whomever. But if you look at content as a value chain, there's a lot of partnership building that still needs to happen across that value chain, because too often times you have a content developer trying to distribute it. And while an NGO who is putting together great ag content is really good at that, it's really the operator or some of the OTT providers that excel in distributing it. And the operator, I know, oftentimes doesn't want to touch content creation, but they don't quite know where to go to really get access to it. And I think the more people identify the comparative advantages they have across that content value chain, and then can slot themselves in, they have that entry point in, and then can establish the relationship and the partners with the other entities that can figure out the pieces that that group does less well, the more vivid and I think valuable this content chain becomes, this value chain becomes. And you can apply any type of content to that. It can be entertainment focused, it can be livelihood focused, it doesn't really matter. But the point is to not try to do it on your own, to really rely on others, what they do best.
Colin, I see you nodding your head in agreement.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Actually, when we talk about content, we can talk about something quite sophisticated, but in our case, it's actually, let's say, the books. And we've tried to do exactly that, actually bring people to the table. As a not-for-profit, and I come from the profit world, it's a real luxury to be a sort of like honest broker. And it's taken us years to get there, actually, to be trusted by the parties around the table. But publishers are there. And we go to publishers and we say, your $10 paper textbook, well, we'll digitize it for you, and we'll make it available. But when we sell it into a program with AID or with DFID or whoever it is, we're going to charge them $1. You're going to get 70% of that back, 70 cents on the dollar. But from a business point of view, those guys are selling, say, 5,000, 10,000 copies of paper books. They have very little distribution. They're getting 15% on that $10. All the capital tied up for 18 months, and they might have a warehouse full of paper books at the end of the season. So just by taking their digital file and making it available, bringing the price down, which I have to say, bringing the price from 10 to 1, that is access. That is access. It's not just technological, it's economic as well. And we've done a lot of work with parents in villages, and we've said to them, would you buy a textbook for your kids? And they go, well, no, I would not do that. That's the government's job. And they're assuming that those books are $10, $12, $15. So well, would you buy a textbook if it was 50 cents or 75 cents equivalent? And the value proposition is totally different. You could bundle a whole year's textbooks for $3 or $4, and the publisher still makes a ton of margin on that. So that's just one example of very literally content. We've brought publishers to the table, the mobile guys to the table, government to the table, and say, well, this is a market that we're trying to stimulate. And because it's an imperfect market, you do need either the development community or not-for-profits or kind of almost an independent, just to stimulate it, to see where that goes. Now, the jury's out whether that's going to scale enormously, but every ingredient is on the table for it to scale because the devices and the connectivity is out there.
Alex.
Just one quick thought around the idea of building sustainable models that drive digital inclusion. I think there are certain business models that work very well, targeted directly at the bottom of the pyramid, but I think we should also not ignore mixed income models that can scale down and scale across an entire country, entire population. If you think about M-Pesa, in its early days, it was something that found a killer app that wasn't necessarily targeted at the bottom of the pyramid, but it found sustainability as a mixed income model. In the last panel, Facebook came up a ton of times. It started as an Ivy League college connection device. And so as we think about building things that will scale the digital divide, I think it's also really important to think about what are the most sustainable business models we can get that can have value across the value chain. And sometimes mixed income models are the right model as well. So I think that's just the added dynamic in my head.
Anil, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm just sitting, reflecting when I'm listening to the other panelists. So here's my perspective. I think, and this is, through the lens of our market, which is India. I think the term digital divide is becoming less and less relevant because it's more about a bandwidth divide. I think, pretty much everyone has some kind of a, at least a GPRS signal. So I think this is important to understand that, our customers really have access to some kind of data. The question is how much data. The second, I think, for anything to thrive and flourish, entrepreneurs need to move in and make investments and take risks. I think that's kind of blanket across the board. What is going to be essential, in my view, is really the role of the operators in the next 10, 15 years. And this is something which most of the operators are struggling with today because, we're going, or actually we've moved from the voice era into the data era, and we have an increasing disconnect between cost and between revenue, and between data bandwidth and between revenue. Perhaps, the ones who are lagging the most are the legislators, the lawmakers, the regulators, and technology, is far ahead of the law. We have, just an example, in India, next week there are going to be auctions for spectrum, and we're talking about multi-billion-dollar bids for spectrum and so on. So what's going to happen in the industry? Will the operators of today evolve into really just infrastructure bit pipes, or will they succeed in their ambitions to, to stay up in, in the value chain and also offer some kind of curated content? I think, that the jury's still out on that one. But really, for any sort of service to get a foothold, I think entrepreneurs need to move in, and for them to move in, it has to be a safe business environment where, the rules of the game are defined, and there's some kind of legal framework to protect. That's the only way for this to move.
So you're sort of hinting at government stepping in and doing a framework here, or do you think that this can evolve by itself?
I think, less is more is probably the way to go for the regulator. I think there's a danger in regulators trying to go in and really control too much. And like Patrick was alluding to, I think, you need to take a step back and let's see what evolves, rather than trying to go in and micromanage the development.
Okay, very good. I'm just going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll throw it open to the audience as well. We mentioned the operator a couple of times here, and I'm not sure how many operators are in the room today, but what is the role of the operator in all this, do you think, in terms of, does the operator today recognize that there is a need at the customer end for something along the lines that we've been talking about, products and services which are more meaningful to the customer themselves? Do you think there's a realization, there's a move towards that? But
I think what's interesting in this panel is I suspect we all have a different definition of what bridging that digital divide means, and I don't think we need to hash out what everyone's take is on it, but for us, it's really about someone being able to maximize these technologies to enhance their lives. And we do spend a lot of time in rural, remote areas with underserved communities who don't have a lot of money. And I think for operators, the fact of the matter is they're still in a bit of a pivot that, the markets that they have been working in are largely saturated. They've targeted all the young males with income in big cities. And now as they pivot more towards more remote communities and different demographics, those business models have to shift. And Colin touched a little bit on scale, which I think is also part of bridging the divide. And if I may, I'm just going to use an example from you guys that we fund. What World Reader's been able to do in Nigeria, for example, is take a very successful Sesame Street curriculum that has been localized in, I don't know, maybe 20 markets. And they've said, look, we know that the medium has been traditionally television. The reality is, even across Nigeria, a lot of homes still don't have TVs. But if you look at the pace at which smartphones are growing in that country, you now recognize that your distribution model changes. To get Sesame Street content out to more communities, you need to put it through smartphones. And this is actually what World Reader is doing rather well. They're not having to start from scratch, which I think is an important point to make. So on the subject of where you get content from, pull from what works, figure out the new distribution models, and then deliver it that way. And I think operators have a huge role to play in that. I don't know if they're working with you in this case, but I think it ties back to the need to partner with nonprofits and NGOs and really look to how you're going to get that content into people's hands in a way that's accessible and meaningful to them.
Patrick, do you have a view on this? I mean, you're part of the ICT industry there.
I think the operator can play both a good and a bad role, but we also need to realize, I mean, the vision that I was talking at the beginning, requires such massive investment that can take decade to realize that, honestly, an operator who's looking at his quarterly return cannot afford and cannot realize. So that's where really intervention of government with partnership with the development partner can really spur the industry, give it strength so they can invest in the long term. But one of the things that we're not really looking at, that I need to emphasize, is the education benefit, the healthcare benefit, and the business benefit will take decades to show. I think there's a study that's been done by, I think, the OECD by a professor called Dr. Ralph Katz, who showed that you need, in order to reap the benefit of broadband, you need to get to 20%. That's when you start really the curve. But if you don't get to 20% real broadband, then you'll never see, and it will look like just an investment. So what will happen after is really you'll see the reduction of the cost of healthcare, the cost of education, and those governments will reap the benefit, but you also see increased business, increased market, increased sale, because now you have put people into the global community where they can trade, they can communicate, they can leverage all the benefit of the 21st century.
Yes, sir. One spot where I think operators are uniquely positioned is, and to all the operators in the room, you have unique amount of scale and reach and understanding of the customers and ability to touch people's lives, that I think the spot where you can really, really help drive innovation in some of these things is to partner with innovators and starters and startups that are starting to think about some of these new ways of doing things. One example, a company called Lendo is partnering with Globe in the Philippines, and what they do is they use social media data, so Twitter and Facebook and your Gmail, et cetera, and turn around the age-old question of, people would lend to you based on your character. They would know your family, they would know you, they would know your community, and they would lend you money based on that. How can you replicate that in the digital world by looking at these kind of digital streams of digital pieces of information based on your online activity? I think that having operators partner with companies like that gives, A, they have all of the connections in the network to partner with these types of companies, but B, have the opportunity to distribute the products as well. And so looking for creative ways of setting up partnerships that provide business opportunities for the operator, in this case, higher ARPU and lower churn and a new product, but also really meaningful ways of making impact in people's lives that create this virtual cycle towards digital inclusion, I think is a unique way that you're positioned.
Comments for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think there's certain limitations that we put out there on. But firstly, that we think of 3G and smartphone as a limitation. But, I would repeat the 2G connectivity superhighways. They are superhighways, and they were an enormous investment at the time. They're semi-neglected now. But I think there's a framing that operators have to go back and say, okay, is this the long tail of bringing people into data? And, I talk to many operators, and we have agreements with operators, and some go faster than others. We know that if we put a robust business case together, they've always got 20 ways to make money better than that. Always. I mean, you know, they're getting bombarded with ideas. But if you can put a business case that says over the medium to long term, this is going to bring people into data for a social need, there are visionary operators that are able to take their ARPU and say, okay, we're going to start a business over here that's related, that's not going to dilute our ARPU, because we are looking to the future. Of course, there's risks for them on that, but that I think that's an interesting way to bring them into this. I have to say the terrible word satellite is there, and satellite operators contact us all the time because they're expensive in terms of connectivity, but they also realize they're very good at B2B, but not at B2C. And they want to understand how they can make massive impact for many, many millions of people by just switching that dial and pointing it to West Africa or East Africa. So I would say the operators have a motivation to say, hey, you know, does this enter into my 20 most important projects this year or not? But they have to remember that their market is not growing, as we said, it's mature, and there are other people around the corner that perhaps can't compete directly with them just yet, but they have to remember that people are actually, there are other kind of operators from the sky looking down and saying, well, you know, is there a market for us there further down? So it's a bit of push and pull.
Thank you, very good. I'm going to open the floor for some questions now. Please feel free to raise your hand. I think there's a mic at the back they can bring to you. Any questions? There's a couple in the back.
On now? Yep. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I work for a company called World Remit that sends remittances to mobile money services. And it always strikes me, and I wanted your opinion on this, whether you think people in the West, particularly in Silicon Valley, still regard these sort of things as a philanthropic venture, and they don't actually see that there is incredibly good business here. You have, in the case of our industry, you know, billions and billions, more than $500 billion being sent annually, but relatively little interest in these sorts of areas. And I wondered if that was your experience also.
My experience living in Silicon Valley is that's increasingly people are seeing that there's a huge opportunity. I think World Remit, you're a great example. You guys have just raised a huge investment round from Silicon Valley investors, and I think that's truth across a lot of the new business models. People are starting to think about how digital can be a unique leverage point to create some very interesting business models that couldn't have existed before. And I think we've talked about a bunch of these examples. And my sense is we're still in the early days, and at least from the investor standpoint of a lot of the institutional investors being investing in emerging markets. I think there's still a really big capital gap, but I think perceptions are starting to change, and we're starting to see some really interesting models starting to be formed.
It really is an evolution, and we're still very early on in it. And you know, a couple of us mentioned in the beginning that a few years ago, the Holy Grail was having a successful mobile money product out there. And now, you know, we'll see the state of the industry tomorrow afternoon, but we know that there are a couple handfuls of successful mobile money products out there. But we've now realized that actually just having that mobile money service, whether it's for remittances or just sending cash to a friend or paying for something at a store, is really the entry level point. And it's the excitement now is everything that can be built on top of it. And, you know, it is about being able to pay your water utilities. It is being able to pay for your lighting in very small increments. And now, and all the utility payments that are being built on top of those platforms. And Alex touched upon Signify and the credit rankings that people are now getting just by their top-up usage levels. And I think the insurance products that are now coming online, and people are trying to figure out how you do small-scale savings. So the evolution is really, I think, shown now that the excitement is really it would probably never be at a pinnacle. But I mean, it is definitely at a threshold where I think we're going to see huge, huge changes in business models and innovations on what can happen just because we have mobile money products in place. It's extremely exciting.
I think my own sense on that is that it's becoming more of an enabler, and people are beginning to see that, and I think that's what you guys are saying, really.
Yeah, and you're seeing it on the floor. I mean, I was just spent 20 minutes before coming up here. Everyone has now a mobile money booth.
Yeah.
Not everyone, but many. I mean, 2 years ago, that was definitely not the
Yeah,
case.
yeah, absolutely. Other questions on the floor? Yep.
I'd like to go back to what Colin and Alex were saying. Colin, you mentioned that you want to be one of the 20 most important partnerships for a business. And I'd like your thoughts on how we can make it possible to have a really dynamic ecosystem where you have hundreds of partners or hundreds of thousands of partners. Because right now it's too hard on both sides, on the operator side and the entrepreneur side, to partner up and strike the deals, make the technical connections, the contractual connections. But we have a model with it Apple and Google have pioneered, where they have hundreds of thousands of partners, all the app developers out there. And I think you need to get to that kind of volume before we get the kind of innovation we've seen in that world. So I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on how we get to the point where you don't have to be one of the top 20 partnerships, because there are hundreds and thousands of partnerships possible.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I throw that out because you have to approach the operators with a little bit of, you think you've got the product or the service, but these guys, and I know from other Silicon Valley organizations as well, that are open to everybody, but boy, when it comes to focus at the start of the year, they kind of like throw out a number, whether it's 20 or whether it's 40 or whatever, or it's 5 projects, but they're going to really go for. So I think you have to, number one, recognize that, which you do clearly, but also know that their way in, their way of developing value is to segment their market and segment the opportunities in the market, and then look for partners, multiple partners in those multiple segments. And I think, but I think it's more of a way of actually, for me, it's actually a way of going in, well, okay, I know I'm not going to be the best way for you to make money in this next year, but I'm thinking 5 to 10 years out. Where do you want to be as an organization? And as a portfolio, you're right, whether that's 1,000 or 10,000 in a portfolio. In every portfolio, you need low risk, lots of low risk, no doubt, with operators, middling risk, but they need, like, with 2 to 5% of high risk ventures, what may only end up in investment terms that may go nowhere. But if you can get yourself in there, then you start to get distribution. For us, I'll talk about self-interest and the social interest. They're our distribution partners. They're the Walmarts, right, of getting your product and service out there. So if I can find my way into that 1 to 5% of their portfolio, that they're prepared to take a risk on us, with a massive return for them if it comes off, that's good enough for me. And that's really the way philosophically I approach operators.
Did you want to say something on that?
I did, very quickly, and I'll let Alex talk. I'm glad, Jeff, you prompted this, because I wanted to channel you a little bit earlier in a second response of how operators can be involved. You talk a lot about reducing the friction between operators and whoever's negotiating with them. And it could be around bulk messaging, it could be around standardizing short codes, whatever that negotiation is. The fact of the matter is, all too often, people have a hard time approaching operators and having those conversations. So how to minimize those conversations or have them at greater volumes, less and less, I think is something that mobile operators could really provide that would be a huge value to the young entrepreneurs, to the aggregating companies, to even the international development industry, to actually reduce that friction and make it easier to do those negotiations, I think would be very meaningful.
2 quick thoughts. And I really enjoy the question as well. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think there's a really big opportunity for operators to think about how do I make it very much easier to partner or to try innovations. And so the reality is, at least from my vantage point of working with many startups, it takes a very long time. The sales cycle is very long, piloting things. So figuring out ways to have as much openness and open APIs and standards and things like that, I think I think that'll help drive that. I think two, on the startup side, the challenge is that in many of these markets, the startup environment is still very nascent. I think in Silicon Valley, we might be at a high, but frankly, in a lot of emerging markets, there's still a lot of room to grow, and I think figuring out ways to support that at a local level is paramount. And I think, to your point of 100,000 connections, I think this is a broader kind of ecosystem question as well, because we won't get to 100,000 by just solving, just working with the operators and the innovators. I think we need to think about what is the enabling infrastructure and regulatory situation. How do we think about awareness and education of the customer and things like that to build the broader environment for this to make sense? So I think it's very much a multifaceted answer.
Do you have a view?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just sitting here smiling. Yeah, so, it's kind of the clash of cultures. And my background is from telecom industry. And, the DNA of a mobile operator is to get a license, which is very hard to get, engineer, roll out, and run networks. And this DNA runs very deep. I'm struggling here trying to think of an operator who's really mastered the art of engaging with multiple, small developers. And so I don't know of one. Even the most sophisticated operators, the Nordics and so on, doesn't exist. What an operator needs to do is to think of their network as a platform, like Apple thinks of its OS, and engage and understand, and get this insight that the more people that develop for my platform, the better it's going to be for me. I don't really see that happening, anywhere today. And you see, the challenge. It is, changing DNA is kind of biologically a challenge, as I understand it. So really, this is the dilemma facing the industry. Look at this from the operator's perspective. They take this huge risk, sink in billions of dollars into this network, and you have these tiny little companies coming in there and skimming all the cream, and they have no access to this revenue in there. And I think that's kind of the core of the problem. So until we've found a way where the operators can take part of the revenue stream and take part of the value creation that's going on in these little companies, this is going to continue to be a challenge.
Good. Any further questions? Yep. Right up here in the front, please, if we could have a mic.
It's actually a response to that ecosystem question. I'm sorry, I didn't see who the speaker was who asked the question, but just to perhaps highlight the work that the GSMA is actually doing in the mHealth space. They've put together an mHealth ecosystem initiative, which is actually trying to address exactly that challenge that you mentioned, where there's actually not a clear pathway to interoperate with an operator or interconnect. And so what they've tried to do is put together an ecosystem initiative which will allow the stakeholders to come together. It is only for the mHealth space, but hopefully if it works well, which is still to be seen, it can be replicated across other verticals. It may not be possible to do it quite in the same way as with an app store, but by vertical or by industry it may be feasible. So I'd encourage whoever asked that question to maybe come chat to me afterwards if they want to know more about the mHealth ecosystem.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Yeah, right over there.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate this. Actually, this is my first time attending this, and I wonder, we're speaking about mobile operators, we're speaking about governments, we're speaking about content creators, but what about the real partner here, the actual end user? Why are we integrating the end user and counting on the end user to change part of their DNA, like you said? We can start, I guess, by number one, stop looking at this as a philanthropic opportunity, start looking at it from a commercial opportunity. To me, I can go into any country and I can create a business model. And I can start with this many customers, and eventually the next project will include this many customers, and that circle will continue on growing. But why aren't we including that end user in our equation? Why aren't we counting on everyone changing their DNA with the exception of that end user? So.
Interesting question. Very good question. Would you care to answer it, guys? Somebody have a question?
I'd just say, well, I totally agree with you. It's like, it's kind of like a oxymoron, really, isn't it? A business oxymoron. Procter & Gamble don't go and say, hey, they're not so worried about the distributors. They're obsessed about the customer and the end user, both their express needs and their unexpressed needs. So I use them as it could be a benchmark example or pretty sophisticated knowledge of end user. And I think in development, I'm new to development as well, but I was kind of quite surprised by the mindset around us and distributors, and not about the end user, as you're clearly saying there. So I couldn't agree more. I think data helps. I think data, I go back to our personal experience on our feature phones that we can get to so many people, and we can start to think about people as individuals. A child or an adolescent girl in a village in northeastern Ghana is an individual with expressed needs and unexpressed needs, just like anybody else on the planet. And that mindset is super, super important when it comes to development or even development segmentation. Just bringing sort of like marketing mindsets to this. And I think it's a great point you make.
Can I just elaborate on one thing? So I come from the United States, and for those that live in the United States, they can look at the mobile industry. It was a post-paid industry up until 6 years ago, and that's when I was very, very blessed into going into that industry. And looking at I think I was loud enough. Looking at the prepaid industry in the U.S., starting from over 15 years ago with the first prepaid carrier to cater to those underserved, underbanked immigrant communities, and all of a sudden everyone is starting to look at it from a different perspective. And over the last 4 years, I can tell you today the prepaid user in the U.S. gets a heck of a lot better value for their money. A lot more innovation and services are going to that prepaid channel than the postpaid channel. The prepaid consumer is a lot more educated on what's available in that smartphone. So if we were to kind of take that and replicate, just a part of it, where to count that consumer in, and to say that these guys may actually be able to evolve themselves without our help. Like, we don't have to do it for them. Let's just start something, and they're more than capable of doing it themselves. And that's what I meant by that.
Any thoughts on that?
I actually think that a lot of what we're talking about here has the end user inherently baked into it. And if you go back to my earliest comments about what it takes for a digital economy to be inclusive, the inclusive part of that is very, very much situated on the end user. And as a USAID federal government employee, I am a servant of all the end users out there. And the previous panel we had talked a lot about the demand side of the equation and the importance of digital literacy and the importance of making content locally relevant and the importance of making services affordable. All of that really, I think, is for the end user and the customer. And we were touching on it a little bit earlier. I promised not to repeat myself, but to counter that promise, I think one of the most important components to this is actually, I think it talks a little bit to what you're saying, is if you don't think of the end user as a customer or as a consumer of content specifically, and start thinking of them as a creator, how do they figure out the information that's useful for them, adapt it, manipulate it, strengthen it, putting it back out there online for others to take a hold of? If you empower them and we all collectively help get them to a higher level, then their DNA is going to change because they're going to find relevance. They're going to find meaning in these digital technologies, that they're going to want to be a greater part of it. They're going to start demanding more from operators, more consumer awareness, better understanding their pricing structures. It's all going to be, I think, kind of a chain reaction if we can get them to at least a baseline where they're comfortable in engaging online in a safe, effective manner.
Patrick?
You know, you're touching into a deeper issue here. And I think it's, one of the diseases of Africa. You know, for the last 50 years and of the developing world, you know, people have assumed they can come and tell them how to develop, that they cannot figure out how they can do it. I live in the US as well, and as I was traveling back to Rwanda, I said, but why there's no prepaid, you know? And then they figure out there is value. But you have also to understand that certain product that are developed for a certain part of the world, they're just trying to replicate in a different market. But that's why it's a fantastic also opportunity for local entrepreneurs who understand local need in the way that even I count myself. I'm US educated, live there and all that. It will be very, very, very arrogant for me to come and say, I do understand the need of somebody that make $2 per day, the struggle they are going through, because I never lived that life. I do not understand the same way the partner of social interaction, economic activity. And for me to understand that, I will need to spend so much time with them. So then what do we do to address that? For example, we created an innovation space where we say we're going to operate at minimal. We're going to find our own fund. The problem is we are trying to replicate solutions that worked for a rich world and cannot work for a world. We need to make sure that we empower the people, but not from where we stand and where we are. It's just giving the tool, let them do it themselves. And you know what? Then it will work. But it's a deeper issue. And I think on the larger context, we need to look at, you know, African and the developing world need also to say out there, you know, we know what we need to do. We understand some of the challenge we face, and we're going to lead our development. Because what has been done in the last 50 years, it's basically, and hasn't been very successful, it's like people coming with nice theory, but no, you cannot see the result. And let me tell you, you cannot, if people do not take ownership of their future, there's no amount of aid, there's not amount of intervention, there's no amount of money poured at it that's going to change the real livelihood. And that is a deeper question, I think, for another session.
We'll have a different panel on that one.
Yes.
It's a very interesting one, actually. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other questions out there? Yeah, there's one out there. Yeah, maybe one last question.
Thank you. Gianluca Bruni, I work with the United Nations. And talking about the bridging of the digital divide, particularly when we spoke about the various examples, I noticed a lot of examples where we're working with countries which are actually very close to making that step. We're talking about Uganda, we're talking about Tanzania, Rwanda. There's a whole other world out there. We can talk about the Central African Republic, we can talk about Mali, we can talk about countries. There were references about governments leading partnerships. There's plenty of countries where one of the primary issues is actually the stability of the government. So my question to the panel is, are we building solutions to bridging the digital divide that applies to countries which are close to making that step? Is there one set of solutions that works for Uganda, that works for Liberia, that spent years investing in education, and just when they were close to actually making it work, they went back 5 or 10 years because of a virus? Is there a standard solution that applies to all of those environments? Do we need to tune that to radically different situations around the world? Thank you.
I'm going to give you each maybe a minute to do this because we're running out of time, but a very broad question. Sorry to limit you. Any thoughts?
I'll take my 1 minute. There's so many places to insert oneself into that question. So just to pick one, using Uganda and Liberia as a very real case in point. If you look at what UNICEF really launched in Uganda around U-Report, that is engaging, several 100,000 Ugandans daily on issues that are relevant to them. The community that has been built around U-Report and the decisions now that the government of Uganda are now making, financial, social service delivery decisions based on the responses of the Ugandan citizens through U-Report, that is a model that is being replicated in a number of countries. And we're now looking at how, once we get past the current Ebola crisis in Liberia and the affected countries, of how to apply the U-Report platform to Liberia. And one of the ways to do it, you made mention of, putting the standards in place so that everyone is operating on the same level, is actually next month there's a number of actors who are going to meet in Accra, Ghana, to figure out what the standards are for real-time data collection systems and how they're interoperable and how they speak to one another, so that we can then go out and take what is working in Uganda, for this example, apply it to Liberia, and then fit together what else needs to happen. So I think it's a great question to prime all of us as we move forward beyond this panel of where else we can put that into practice.
I'll take a slightly different angle to the question. And from the lens of innovation and startups that I've seen, in a lot of markets, startups have been thriving or been founded when some preconditions, often with many preconditions existing. And you look at some of the most thriving startup environments in Africa, a lot of them are more stable environments that have higher concentration of some of the accelerators. For instance, in Kenya, Nairobi has M-Pesa, it has a really strong increasingly strong penetration of data, et cetera. I think that we should think about a lot of these things as building blocks. And at least in the startup environment, it's very helpful when you have a lot of these building blocks in place. And in other markets, I think innovation in startups can work. It's sometimes more difficult for a digital-based delivery startup or a mobile money-based startup to succeed without some of these building blocks in place, I think is the hard reality. So some different hybrid models or different types of setups might be closer to the answer. I don't know if that answers.
Okay, yeah. Quickly, Colin?
Yeah, 30 seconds then.
30 seconds.
No, great question. I mean, Africa, 50 plus countries carved up by the Europeans, 100 plus years ago. It's kind of, you're dealing with sort of strange parameters. But I'll come back to the pyramid, but not an economic pyramid, a connectivity pyramid where you have 3, 4G at the top, but you have this massive 2G network that is there. The superhighways are there. And relatively mild level of investment to innovate over the 2G network and cut right across any one of those borders. You actually don't need operators to be promoting this. And I think there's a way there. And we find at World Reader, we've got an enormous amount of people in parts of Africa that are not, if you like, the fashionable tech countries. They're towards the bottom of the connectivity pyramid, but they depend on 2G, and that's their lifeline. That's going to be their lifeline, frankly, for the next 5 to 10 years. So that's one way that we approach them.
Anil, any 30 seconds?
Yeah, less actually.
Yeah.
I think if I understood the question correctly, if it was, is it possible to copy paste regulatory environments and so on? I don't believe so. I don't think it's possible, and like Patrick was alluding to, there are too many local factors. I think it's hard work, but you can cherry pick some of the best elements, but really the regulator in each country, the environment is different, and the solutions need to be very different.
Mm-hmm. Final thoughts?
No, I think you just answered my...
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, panel, for all your time and your patience and your questions. Next up, we have Mr. Sherry Blair. And our very own Jerry Resugud interviewing a fireside chat on financial inclusion, I believe. Thank you very much. It's the end of our panel.